really, it was Noah, and it was the same, my son, the same sentiment of grieving the loss of his father, that I'm like, I don't want him to lose who his mom is as well. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, it would be a true tragedy that he lost the essence of his mom through this tragedy as well. So I'm like, Cristela, you have to find it in yourself to still be who you were before this, but honor and carry this for him, so that he doesn't feel cheated in life any more than he already has been.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in today to listen to today's guest. Today we have Cristela Fowler. Cristela and I have, oh my gosh, known each other. I don't even want to say how long we are. A long time. We met in college, and we actually haven't seen each other since probably graduation day. But we've kept in touch thanks to social media. Yay, social media. So Cristela is here to share her journey, and I'm just so grateful that we've been able to stay in touch and that I've been able to watch all your love story, your motherhood, your all your goals that you've set yourself to do, your career, everything, just because of social media, and that we've been able to keep in touch. So, welcome, my friend.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm so honored that you asked, and so proud of this work that you've done with sharing these stories, and your attitude and your energy just comes through everything. And so I'm just really flattered that you even asked to share my story. This is going to
Oh,
be the first time I actually share my story in this kind of platform and avenue. So I'm glad that it's definitely with someone that I feel really safe to do that with.
I'm honored, my friend. And I have learned so much from even you. And I've told you this before, like when I would watch your own journey, when you would share it, and your attitude and your outlook in life has always been very inspiring. So that's one of the reasons I was for sure wanting you to be on this show and be able to share with our guests. So tell us a little bit about what you do. We were just talking right before we started recording a little bit of just like how you're used to doing Zoom and this and that. So just say a little bit about your work life a little bit,
Mhm.
and then we're talking from you. You're in California. I'm in Dallas. So share a little bit about that, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so yeah, like you mentioned, we met in college. We were both theater majors at Cal State Northridge, enjoying that young and carefree life, and with a lot of hopes and dreams of what we were going to learn and do in our theatrical careers. We graduated in 2001, and obviously life took us into different journeys. And I did a lot of local theater, a lot of Latino theater in LA, and realized what a lot of people do, that there are a lot of actors and musicians and artists in LA. um, and just kind of understanding that theater in particular in LA is just really tough. And for me, being a local girl and having a really strong sense of family and rooted here in LA, I never wanted to take that leap of going across country and 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 attacking the New York theater scene, which
Mhm.
is, obviously something anybody in art would want to do. And in that process, I obviously did a lot of self discovery, both for myself and who I wanted to be, and my what I wanted in life. And kind of stepped away a little bit in 2005 and 6 and kind of got really like, okay, what do you want to do? What's important for you? And I kind of took on um, trying to find a career outside of theater. And I, by chance, through a temp agency, found a job with a food broker. Never heard of it before. It was like a completely different world that I didn't know existed, and it's something that we all utilize the benefits of it in our everyday life when we go grocery shopping. And a lot of people don't even know it's an industry. To this day, my family still cannot explain what I do, and I don't even think my husband. All they
That's
know
why I
is
have.
I get yummy food, and I get stressed out during certain periods. But then they're like, we don't know what you do in your office all day. So a little explanation. I work for a natural food broker, and what natural or food brokers do is they present a portfolio of food products, and we represent them into retail accounts, and we support the brands getting them into distribution, support with their packaging and promotions, and what it takes to get their product from a concept that they might have to retail shelves, and then support expanding that distribution. And so I've been doing that luckily for 13 years. I've been very blessed
Amazing.
and found a very resourceful industry that through market crash and recently COVID, it flourishes because regardless of what we go through in life, everyone goes through their grocery store. That's always something that it's a safety, it's a go-to. So I feel very blessed that I found this industry and have met a lot of amazing people and build relationships not just with work but a lot of friends as well. So um, the broker that I work for now, it's called President's Marketing. It's a national broker, and I've been working from home, which is another blessing, for 13 years. So it's really given me the opportunity to be a working mom, but also be very present for my son and my family. And through what we went through in 2013 and before, having that flexibility even at that point. Was really amazing, and it's interesting to see a lot of companies and people switching to working from home because you can do it. And I'm like, I've been doing it for 13 years,
Yes.
and you find that balance, and it does save so much time and energy in terms of commute and office politics and things like that. So that's been kind of a little bit of a blessing in disguise.
That is so amazing. And when you were describing what a food broker is, I was thinking then back into like the theater world, it would be basically what a manager or agent would be to an actor, like that representative towards in that field. So you basically like represent and support
Yeah.
these industries. So
Yeah, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and self-starters and very artistic people, as well as a lot of very, business-oriented and analytical. So I've been able to find some creativity, even in the industry that's very kind of
Mhm.
business-driven. So that it's so interesting that in a lot of avenues how you can relate or utilize your theater
Yes.
experience more than people would imagine. You know? Do
Yes,
you find that as well?
absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. It's so funny because even when I had the children's gym, and we've talked about this as well a little bit before, but even when I had the gym, like, because that's what I ended up doing when I finished, our theater degree too. Like, I did like a year of going out on auditions and then ended up working in a children's gym, that I was still able to use even my theatrical experience even there,
Mhm.
and then the aspect of that human connection too, and the relatability that you have to customers, and that you feel comfortable speaking to others and things like that also came into play. And then now with the podcast, of course, like I can use some of my voice training, I guess, to some
Yeah.
extent too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I don't ever, obviously I'm not utilizing my degree in terms of, performance or theater, but I do apply a lot of the things that, we were taught um, in not only my everyday but professional life. And it's interesting to explain that to people. But I think unless you've been through a program like that, you realize the benefit of it. It just makes you a really well-rounded individual. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like you can
absolutely.
adjust
Mhm.
to circumstances quickly or personalities or you can kind of read into
Improvise.
people's
You can
or like read into people's
improvise.
nuances because that's what we were taught. Like,
Mhm.
dissect a character and why are they the way they are. All those things I think has always helped me professionally.
That could be we could even make this whole podcast just be about that, the aspect of that, um shifting into what we might have studied, right, to then what it turns out, but still how
Hmm.
we bring on to the table all these other learnings. Like my kid is always saying like, why do I need math? Like, mom, do you use math? And I'm like, I may not, but somebody else in other careers and they do. So we use those things, right, in
Hmm.
our life. And so that is awesome. Now, let's go kind of do a little segue. Did you meet David, your husband, your first husband, in your theater environment, or how did you end up meeting him? And take us into that journey and how that
Yes.
flexibility and improvisation even came into play a lot in that next stage of your life.
Yeah, so I first met Dave in 2001, that summer after we graduated, and a couple of other theater people and friends of ours, kind of in the same situation. Like, okay, we have a degree, now what? Now we need to get a
Mhm.
job, right? And I had a couple friends work at a day spa in Santa Monica. So, Dana, do you remember Dana Tomsick?
Yes. I was
Um,
like, we're gonna have to put all these people in the credits so they know that
Yeah,
I'm
exactly,
tagging them
exactly.
all.
Yeah. She's gonna love it. um, she got me a job, and it's funny because she's been part of both of my relationships. But
Oh yeah.
so
We
she,
let's leave the audience intrigued for step two because
yes,
I'm
yeah,
like,
all
that's
these sub
so awesome.
characters, right?
Love it.
um, so yeah, so she was working at a day spa in Santa Monica, and so she got me an interview there, just doing customer service, checking people in and out. So I went and I interviewed. I think it was like within the month after we graduated, and my sister was moving back from Oakland from her residency, and we were like, why don't we live together, and so we moved to Culver City, and so I was close to that area, and so I started working at the spa and realized within people doing customer service and massage therapists and estheticians, there was a lot of performers there, actors, musicians, artists, that because when you work at the spa, you have your own hours and it's flexible, and it's very geared to, it's kind of like any service, like you're a server or a restaurant. It's kind of the
Mhm.
same kind of environment, which I didn't really realize. I didn't really know much of anything at that point, but um Dave was working as a massage therapist there, and he was full into musician mode. He had a band at the time. They were trying to get signed, and I remember, I don't know the exact date or the time we met, um, but he would come in and he was like, he would make an entrance in a room, like you knew when Dave was there and when he was leaving. He was just always very full of life and obnoxious, some people might say. But I just remember seeing him around the spa, the facility, and a couple of times he would come in on his days off, like pick up either tips or his check or whatever, and he was holding his daughter, who at that point was one, and he was just so proud of her. She was this cute little girl with like a big head of curly hair, just so adorable. And he obviously got a lot of attention for his cute daughter. And once we were just passing each other in the hallway, and he just started talking to me, and I was like annoyed that he would even like stop me to have a conversation with him. I'm like, what? Like, okay, old guy, what do like, just keep moving. um and then my manager, the general manager of the spa, saw that interaction, and he was like, "So come here." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Stay away from Dave Brown." I'm like, "Oh, don't worry about it." I'm like, I laugh, like, I'm like, "We're never going to be friends. Like, I'm not going to know that guy, but thanks for the heads up." So that was kind of the extent of our relationship or friendship or whatever you want to call it, or just like knowing each other. So I worked there for about 2 years, and then my sister bought a townhouse in Encino in the valley, so we moved to the valley, and I transferred from the Santa Monica location of that spa to Sherman Oaks. And I worked there for about 2 years, and then that's when I was like, oh, I need to get real about my life and my career, and I need a real job with benefits and all that good stuff. And that's when I went into trying to find a real career and went into the broker world. And I think it was May of 2008. So we'd met in 2001. So this was about 2008. It was Mother's Day weekend. We were at the now Sherman Oaks Galleria, the new one. And I was with a friend, and I went into a shoe store, and I saw Dave, and he was there with his daughter, who was, I guess, 6 or 7 at the time, with his mom and his sister, and they had just had like Mother's Day brunch. And he was like, "Hey, Cristela." I'm like, "Hey, yeah," and it was still kind of like awkward because I'm like, I remember you were kind of like, loud and obnoxious, whatever. And I was trying to like not be rude, but like not engage. And then he had his daughter, his mom, literally like they were right there next to him, like they were watching us like have this like just greeting. And so then at the end I was like, "Okay, well, bye," whatever, trying to keep it short. He's like, "Well, can I have your number?" And I was like, "Oh my god, what do I say?" Like, and they were all like staring at me. And I was like, "Sure." So I gave it to him, just thinking like, okay, if he calls, I'll just like ignore it, or I'll just blow him off.
And you knew
And
he was a single dad? Did you know he was a single had he been
yes,
a single dad
I
when you
knew.
worked together too? Okay. When you had
Yeah,
worked
I think
together? Okay.
he told me then at some point. I'm sure
Mhm.
in that brief I don't know how that came up, but yeah, I knew
But
that
you knew that.
that
Uh-huh.
he was a single dad at that point. Yeah. So I think it was like a couple weeks. He called me, and like we talked, and I was like, fine, I'll go on a date with you. And I remember he picked me up, and I was just like sitting so far away from him, like literally leaning on the door. And I don't know what I thought. Like, I was just like, he was just this like crazy, loud, like ladies' man that I thought. And I was like, what am I doing here? Um, and I knew he was older than me, obviously. I just didn't know how much older. And he looked really, he was fit and looked young. So I just was like, okay, maybe 10 years. And that night I found out he was 17 years older than me.
Oh, I would
And
have never known that from,
yeah.
like, the picture because 'cause I've only saw him in the pictures on Facebook and stuff. Oh, wow.
Mhm.
No, he did carry himself really well. He
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and then I remember laughing. I was like, "What are you doing?" I think at that point, like I was 29. I was 29, and he was, I don't know, 48, something like that, like 47. I don't know, old for me. And I was like just laughing at it. I was like, you have some,
Nerve.
nerve. Yeah. I'm like, what are you thinking? And there was a moment that I was like, okay, this is just like a normal guy. Like, he's not this like boogeyman that, I thought. And so I kind of let my guard down a little bit, and um we had a great conversation. It was such a good time. And by that point I was like, okay, you can open the door for me, and like I'll humor you. And at the end of the night, he was like, "I'm gonna marry you." I was just like, "Okay, Dave, sure, okay." Like it was fun. Like I humored you, but like don't get crazy. Um, and that's kind of how we ended the night. And like we talked a little bit on and off for a couple weeks after that. And like he wasn't being that serious. I was like, well, it sounds about right. Like, what I thought he was. And then a couple weeks later, he calls me and he was like, can I tell you something? I'm like, sure. And at this point, like, I'm still not taking it serious. And he's like, I was seeing someone when went on a date. And I was like, of course you were. He's like, did you know? I'm like, no, but I figured, I don't know, you're Dave Brown. And so he was like, I really feel like I'm going to marry you. And so I ended it with her.
Mm.
And I want to start clean and I want to like really do this. I'm like, why did you do that? I'm like, I don't.
I just it's like I just met you and I didn't
Yeah.
think
I'm like, we went on one date, dude. Like, calm down, And he was like, what? He's like, no, even if it doesn't work out, it wasn't a good thing anyway. And, there were other like issues. I'm like, well, if you did it for you, that's great. Good for you. Um, and I was like, well, thanks for your honesty, like,
can I just say something? I
uh
hope a lot of guys are listening to this and taking notes as they're listening to this episode of all these like confidence, like little tips that Dave is kind of
oh yeah.
that you're sharing about Dave. Very confident. He knew what he wanted and how he pursued you. I'm like, I didn't know all this love story. I'm
Well,
like
but
cracking up here
yeah.
on this.
Well, again, let me remind you, he was 48. Like he
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
like a spring chicken. So I think this was a lifetime of experience to get him to that point, which helped him at that point.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
made all
yeah.
those mistakes and kind of learned from them.
Right.
Um, so we went out, and again, I'm like, I just had such a fun time. I'm like, yeah, let's go out again. And then had a great second date, and we're a little bit more honest about who we were, what he wanted, and obviously I knew he had his daughter. I'm like, it's funny I think about it now, but I'm like, I don't know if I can be a stepmom, and that's a big responsibility,
Wait, oh my gosh, I'm laughing until
yeah,
wait, you guys.
yeah,
You guys
right,
really hold on tight till the end because listen to what she just said because
yeah.
wait until you hear part 2 of this story, basically.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah, but no,
continue.
it was a big concern.
Yeah.
And then so we kind of talked about that, and I was like, I don't know. And we were very careful. We would only, even just talk on the phone when he didn't have his daughter.
Mhm.
I just was like, I remember once we were on the phone and he was going to school to pick her up, and he's like, oh, I'm picking her up, I'm getting out of the car. I was like, okay, I gotta go, bye. I didn't even want to,
Mm,
I'm like, can we just pretend that that's not there for now? Because I just don't know. I was just
mhm,
like, that's a big undertaking. And then, feelings started growing, and, I was like, he's such a good guy. Like, he won me over,
mm.
and so,
How long did it take? So, 2000 this is 2008 that you met
oh,
him, and you dated then for how long that you actually, like, then started to
I don't know, like three
develop your
months. Yeah, it
okay,
was
okay,
quick.
so
Yeah,
good,
yeah,
good,
yeah. But
okay.
also, like, I'd been single, in
Mhm,
LA, for 9 years, and, you know, a lot of ups and downs with datings and other
mhm,
relationships. And I think when you've had the opportunity to do that, like when something feels good, for
mhm,
me, I'm like, if this feels good, why question it? Do you know what I
mm,
mean?
mhm,
Like if
mhm.
this is a
It felt
good
right, it
connection
felt
and you
right.
have
Yeah.
fun, I'm like, I didn't want to try to find the reasons not to.
Mhm. Because at the
Which was
beginning, you were
interesting.
allowing yeah, I think at the beginning too, you were allowing other people's concept or a preconception about him to affect what you thought of him. Because like when that woman and your the spa said like, "Don't mess with him," or something like that, like you're like, "Oh no," like you know what I mean? Like you basically kept your guard up a lot based on what others maybe perceived him to be too. Do you think?
No, he was who
No?
everyone thought, and he
He
would
was?
admit
Oh, oh,
it.
oh.
Like, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, no,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay.
no, he was that. It took him, it took him, and he would say that, being a single dad and raising his
Mm,
daughter and raising a girl really brought a lot of perspective to him, and he
mm,
did a lot of in that time, like what kind of father, what do I want? Who do I want to be with? So he'd done a lot of growing. And by
mm,
that time, it was a man. It was um his name was Brian, the general manager at the spa. He was the massage therapist department manager when we connected in 2008. And this guy Brian and Dave were like best friends at that point.
mhm,
So just
mhm,
to kind of show you like his
mhm,
kind of development in that time as well. So like
mhm,
we had both grown in that time. Um in terms of our maturity and like, what we were looking for. The age thing, it would just come into play when I would think of like, okay, what is this going to look like in 10, 15 years? And,
mm,
obviously at that point, I'm like, I do want kids and I do want my own child. And like, how do you feel about that? And he was always very like, I've never had my own family with my child that I didn't have to share and raise it with my partner that I can partner in life with. So he's like, I know it's crazy, but he's like, I would want that with you. And that was obviously one of the conversations that we had. And, wanting to make sure he was okay with that. I was okay with that. And because he was so young and full of life, that I just never thought it would be a problem, that, in terms of like his age and being able to be present and active, an active father. Um, and so, um, it was about 3 months, I would say, when we were like, "Okay, this is serious." And then it was another time where, he was picking up his daughter from school, and I was on the phone, and this time I didn't run away. I didn't hang up the phone. And as soon as she saw him, you could just hear this little girl, um, yell, "Daddy!" And, like, I could imagine her just running to him and jumping in his arms, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm in trouble."
'Cause you saw a whole other side of him then
Yeah.
and the cuteness, yeah.
Yeah.
Aw.
As a dad, and I'm like, oh, this is really a different person that I
Mm,
knew in the spa. So, eventually, obviously I met Kayla, and I mean, we just hit it off from the beginning, and we just had a really, really strong relationship, and she did show me a lot about becoming a stepmom. Um,
mm,
and really supporting her, and like, just kind of like, it's interesting. I always thought, like, in all the Disney movies, the stepmom's always like, the wicked stepmom, and like, there's not a whole lot of good narratives,
mm,
and I just wanted to not ever be that for her. And like, I always told her, I'm just bonus. Like, I'm not bonus mom. I'm not
mhm,
bonus dad. I'm bonus whatever you want. Bonus friend, bonus therapist, bonus, whatever extra you need in your life, Kayla, you come and tell me. You come and talk
mm,
to me. And I never pressured her. Um, and it really kind of helped us solidify, our dynamics with her. And she always felt, she was a part of us when she was here, and she was, a part of her mom's family when she was with her mom. So, I really rely on that now, um, in my new
Wait,
situation.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
wait a minute, get
Yeah.
hold it, hold your horses here. Let wait, let me guide you into because I wanna make sure that we get all these little pieces of this, and it's so amazing how many details and, that you remember still, of all how you met, Dave and things too, and what a beautiful connection that
Hmm.
you were able to develop. So then you guys got married, and take us into that and then into when it kind of turned to
Yeah.
took a turn.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we got married in 2010. And shortly after that, we started looking like, okay, if we want to have, a baby, we might need to start, buying a house or a townhouse or something. So we started oh, one thing I did want to mention
Yeah,
is
go
that
ahead.
Brian, the general manager, was actually in our wedding.
Oh.
Um, So it just is it's a nice full circle from him telling me to stay away from him to him being a groomsman at our wedding. Um and he had again like they created such a bond. They eventually were like brothers.
Mm,
So it was just, again to just really show who Dave was and how he built really, really strong relationships with people. And he was the kind like as soon as you know him, he's your best friend. And everyone would say that. Like, I just feel like I'm his favorite, right? Like my sisters are like, well, I'm his favorite, or my friends are like, I'm his favorite. I'm like, sure, sure, sure. Like he just
love
had that
that.
kind of charisma. So that was in 2010 that we got married, and then we started looking to buy a home. I think it was yeah, I guess like in 2011, we purchased a home in Van Nuys and moved in there, and then within the month that or like 2 weeks after we moved in, I found out I was pregnant
Mm,
with Noah, with our baby. And one of the things I've thought about a lot, especially in that first relationship, because with David, every process, every stage, I always thought something was going to happen. I even remember like I'm like, oh my god, my parents are gonna kill me. They're gonna like what are you doing with this guy who's 17 years older than you, who's been married before, has this daughter? Like, what are you doing? And Kendra, they fell in love with him,
mm,
and they were like, he's our son now, Um, and so we actually, we lived together before we moved in, and I'm like, oh my god, they're gonna kill me,
and they were
Latinos, very
fine.
traditional,
Yep.
and they were like, okay, well, if that's what you need. And I was like, really? I'm like, okay. um and then we were looking into buying a house or like the wedding, obviously the stresses of having a wedding. I'm like, oh, something's gonna happen. And it was just like beautiful, with family there. It was a beautiful wedding. And then I was like, okay, I'm not gonna get pregnant. That's what's gonna
Mhm,
happen. I'm like, I'm not we're gonna have issues with getting pregnant. Within the year we were pregnant, and then I was like, what if there's something wrong with the baby? It
mm,
was always something like in my gut or in my heart or somewhere that I'm like, you know this is too perfect. Like, this doesn't happen to people like me, like this kind of life just doesn't come together. And the baby was born, and I remember like in the beginning I like was working out, and then as soon as like it was real, like you can see my belly, I was just like, I'm not moving until this, I this baby comes out healthy, and I don't want to do anything to, risk it. But Noah was born. I mean, Noah was how can I put this? He was like a tornado from day one.
Tasmanian, that Tasmanian,
Yes. Yeah.
a lot of
He
energy.
is. Yeah, yeah. Dave even coined the term. He was the town crier, because he
Mm,
cried so much. It was just unbelievable. I'm like, I've never seen a baby cry this much. I'm like, how do people do this? How do they have more than one? How did like? It was so traumatizing, and I'm like, you're lucky because I don't even want to think about another one. Like, this is it. This is it. We're good. Um, and so that he was just a tough baby, and so we were kind of got through the first year of Noah's life just barely. We were exhausted and definitely grateful. And it was at his Noah's first birthday in March of 2013. um, Dave first kind of mentioned, he was like, oh, I got this little side pain. And I was like, okay. And then he went to the doctor like the next week, which that's one of the things because he did have ulcerative colitis. And so he had colonoscopies every year since I think he was like 25. And that was a preventative measure for detecting like colon cancer early to deal with it. Um, and so he had just had a colonoscopy the year before. So cancer was just not even in our thought. And he was, again, really healthy, took his medication, really in tune with his body and um his job. He wasn't the kind, like, you hear people are like, oh, when you're a parent or you're an adult, you kind of don't deal with things. Like, as soon as he felt anything, he was at his
Keep
doctor's
go.
office. He was always on top of that stuff. So I just didn't really it just didn't I never even thought it was anything. And he went in, and the first time he came home, he's like, um they found something. I think it was in his liver. And he's like, they think it's cancer. I was like, what? What? Like, how? And I just was like, no, it's not. It's something else. Um, and then the interesting thing, like, he had two sisters. They were twins. They were both doctors, or they are. And my sister's a doctor. And so he had gotten an X-ray, and all three of them called, and they were concerned. And that's where I was like, oh, okay. Okay, so we'll deal with it. I'm like, you're strong, you're healthy, you have a lot of support. I'm like, we're gonna get through stage one, I'm sure. I'm like, you were just there, a year ago. I'm like, this is gonna be fine. It's whatever it is, we're gonna deal with it, and you'll be fine. And then he went in for a colonoscopy, and they biopsied it. And every time we went to the doctor, within those 2 months, it was worse news. They told us after the colonoscopy it was colon cancer, and it was stage 4, and it's a very rare and aggressive form of cancer. And they said the first
And they had
time.
never, how did they, like, so even though he had had a colonoscopy
Mhm,
just the year before,
mhm,
like
yeah,
just in 1 year, by
yeah,
the time he went back, something that had not even been there or been seen, was already a stage 4.
yeah. That's why I just couldn't believe it. I'm like,
I can't
there's
believe it
something
either.
like,
I'm like, wow.
it was like so surreal. And I'm like, okay, we can beat this, like, okay. And but it's like every time we were at UCLA, we went to City of Hope for a second opinion, and their diagnosis was worse. I'm like, when I tell you, every time we went to the
Mhm.
doctor, it was worse news than the time before. The first time they told us, maybe 2 years um, with treatment. And we're like, no, no, that's not. I'm like, okay. And I remember even like thinking to myself, okay, they say 2, but this is Dave Brown. Like, he's not going to leave us. Like,
Mhm.
maybe 5, 5 years to build memories with Noah. Kayla will, get her through graduation, enough time so Noah can have his own memories. That at that point, that was what I was
As your
hoping
focus.
for.
Your focus was for Noah to be able to remember who his dad was.
Yeah, and have his own memories of him. And
Mhm.
Kayla get through, the awkward teenage years, and um, kind of get through that with her dad. Even if he was sick, even if we had,
Mhm.
he wasn't at 100%. Like, if we can just get 5 years um of ups and down, like, we would still have him.
Mhm.
Um and then I think it was at City of Hope, they told us, like, it's you have 6 months to a year. And
Gosh.
that was the first time I saw him really break down and realize the severity of what was coming. Um, and once he started treatment, it was just so aggressive. Like, he lost 30 pounds in like 2 weeks. Um, and at that point, I was still working full time, single mom. I mean, new mom.
No, mhm.
It was just an emotional, um, just whirlwind of, still trying to enjoy this new baby and this life that we created, and realizing, we don't know how long we're going to have it for,
Mhm.
and that what we were going to have wasn't going to be what we thought we were going to have. um, and telling Kayla was one of the most heartbreaking
Yeah, because
things.
Noah was too little he was still
Yeah.
a year old, right, in that
Hmm.
process. So he really would have comprehended too much. So how did you both tell her? Did Dave tell her? How was that
Yeah. So
conversation?
obviously through the process, we were keeping her mother in the loop of updates, and obviously, letting her know, everything we knew. So we talked to her, and we were like, obviously, we all want to be there. We want Kayla to know that the three of us are going to be there for her regardless what happens through this process. And she was, obviously wanted to be there when we told her. So the three of us, sat her down in our living room, and we told her the facts. I don't
She
remember
was
if
how old
we
at that point? She was
she was 12.
12. Okay.
Hmm. um like, we didn't know, or I don't remember if we told her exactly, like, hey, it's within the year or any. We didn't tell her that. We did tell her it was very aggressive, and that dad was going to be sick, and that it was cancer, and it was, everything. um the
Mhm.
time frame we didn't, because I don't even
Mhm.
think we even comprehended what that meant
Mhm.
ourselves. um and so, and we were like, wanted to be positive, like, we're gonna fight this, we're, like, your dad's strong, and we're gonna do everything we can to, continue to find joy and live our life. But obviously it was just devastating. And um let's say that was probably in May, early May. And he went through treatment, and a lot of support from friends and family outpouring. I mean, they had fundraisers, and they did a concert that he played. I think it was a month before he went into the hospital. The
Mhm.
spa where we worked at, they did a day where, all the proceeds went to us, and then the owner doubled it. It was just like an
Mm.
amazing, like,
Support.
I was like
Yeah.
floored by the love this man, um, generated, and the support that people that he hadn't heard from in 5 years. They were like, we love you so much, and it was just like very humbling and sad, because I don't know. I just feel like things like this. It's almost feels like it's people that are impact a lot of life are the ones that kind of, I feel, take on a lot of energy. And I don't know if that's a manifestation, but like, I just have this theory on my own that I've kind of come up with, that people that take on a lot, or are a lot for a lot of people, are more susceptible, because they carry a lot. And that's kind of how I felt with David. Like, he was the rock of his family with his sisters and his mom. And, he was an anchor for, even, like, not only me, my sisters, my parents, like his friends, just everyone felt such a personal connection with him. And everybody thought the same thing, like, no, like, not David, like, not him,
Mm.
so we went through that and tried every, kind of like holistic, Eastern medicine, Western medicine, like everything we could to try to, try to lead a normal life and support his treatment, and try to, add, at this point it sounds silly, but like another month, another 3 months, whatever it was, I was buying
No,
into
but
it.
that makes a huge difference, especially in a baby's life, right? So for you guys, even
Yes.
just adding that 1 month, 2 months, again, as you said, for Noah to be able to have even just one more memory with dad, that still was a lot of time for in his little short life, of Noah's little short life then. So buying a month was a big month um for him, for
Yeah.
Noah per se. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so we lived that way.
So how
So I
long
guess
how long did
it
it
was
so they gave you 6 months to a year.
yeah.
How long was the process?
So it was in October of 2013. I think he was like in his sixth round of chemo. And chemo was not friendly to him. We spent
Mhm.
like nights in the hospital where I just would go into the restroom and just pray to God. I didn't even know what I was praying. Like
Mhm.
was I praying for
Or
myself?
yeah,
Was I
yeah.
praying for him to get through it? Was I praying for it to
Mercy, yeah, if you were
yeah,
praying for mercy for yeah,
yeah.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
like I would just like relief, or just something like just for it to go one way or another, whatever it was going to be, because it was just it was like torturous, and you would have hope and then it would be taken away within 24 hours. It was such a kind of roller coaster ride of emotions. So he but it was in October, like in the middle of October, like the day after he had chemo. He was going under, I think it was cardiac, or like he just wasn't good, he wasn't breathing, it wasn't good. And I remember it was he and I and Noah in the house. And Noah, I remember this day, we had just bought him a new outfit. They were doing picture day at his preschool
mm,
or daycare. And I remember I eventually, because I was calling his sisters and kind of giving them an update throughout the night because he wasn't doing well. And uh eventually, I think it was like 6 in the morning, they were like, you need to call, you know the paramedics. And I was just like, it was such a surreal moment, because at that point there was a moment right before I called. Noah woke up, and I brought him into our room, and it was just the three of us. And I was doing cold compresses and holding Noah, and he was completely, obviously, oblivious. And that was the last time we were together, the three of us.
mm,
um, the paramedics came, and I remember I put him in the high chair and I put some cereal just for him to just be distracted there. And they came in and they took him. And then he went into, the ICU. He was intubated by that night, and he was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Um, and it was the same thing. One day he was good, the next day was bad. At that point, I think his kidneys had given away. And I remember just going through every scenario. I'm like, what is the best case scenario if we get him home and then he's in dialysis, but the cancer's still there? So then does he do chemo? Like, what are we doing? It was just like so confusing and so
mm,
difficult. And at the time, I was 34 years old. I was uh, like, never did I imagine I was going to be in a situation where I had to make this choice. And I felt this obligation to his family and his sisters. And we were all like, who's deciding this? What are we doing? What's the road? Like, what do we do? And I remember, like, I lived in that hospital for 3 weeks. I didn't even see my son for 3 weeks. And
mm,
it was like everything in the world just stood still. I remember talking to friends like the first week, and then 3 weeks later they were like, you're still there, like what's going on? And it was just like everything stood still, and we just couldn't let go. It was so hard that we were there. It was like 5 months from the time we first got his diagnosis to being in the ICU with
mm,
him, um, really not there anymore. And then my friend Liz, Brian's wife, who'd been so supportive with us through everything, took me to lunch. And she had done, she was a social worker in her previous career. And she just kind of had a, come to Jesus meeting at that point with me. And she's like, you're going to have to decide this. His sisters won't.
mhm,
um, And she kind of walked me through the scenarios of the rest of my life in a very pragmatic and sensible way, where she's like, you know, every holiday you're going to remember this. Do you want to remember this during Christmas, during New Year's? Do you want this for Noah? Do you want this for Kayla? And so it just kind of it was the conversation that I needed in that moment. Um, and so when I went back to the hospital, I remember talking to my sister and I said, I need you to be there for me when I have this conversation. And we would have meetings with the doctors for updates. And, the last one, I think we were all there. Um, and we just kind of decided, obviously we were going to remove all the life support um, machines and everything. And then um, we all just sat there for, I think it was about 12 hours, just holding his hand and just watching, the heart monitor, you know. And I think it was around midnight that night, where, his heart obviously was the last thing that went. And, um, you know, there were moments of like he would open his eyes, but, I think it was just kind of like the reaction. It was just really surreal. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was his story.
Mm,
Um, and then I just remember wanting to go home and just hold Noah and just be there for him. And, one of the things that I struggled with from the time he went to the ER was, um, how was this, how people say everything happens for a reason, or, there's a sense to it. And I'm like, I I can understand that for myself, but I couldn't ever make sense of it for his son and his daughter.
mm,
Um, because I'm like, I still have both of my parents, and I this is the first time I've been touched by death in this close, the most close, person in your
mhm.
life.
Yeah, the father of your child, your spouse, your partner, the person you've built your dreams around with as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was the most difficult thing for me. And in my own way, I'd kind of in my head had gone through the process of like, this is going to happen soon at some point, and I know I'm going to be okay. And but it was like I always went back to Noah, especially because he, like, here's a person that, as I've described, touches someone's life. And everyone has a story about David Brown, a funny story or a touching story or a sentimental story. And I'm like, his son doesn't have that. His son
Mm,
doesn't have a firsthand story of this amazing person. And
mm,
that that was really hard for me in the beginning. Really, really hard. um, and so luckily I did have a lot of support. I remember a couple times my girlfriends came over to the house when I was still staying at the hospital, and they would just make dinner for me, and they're like, just come have dinner with us, just take a break. And I would do that, and they would do little things around the house, just kind of try to clean up, or there was always someone there. And so after he passed, and we were working, on the funeral arrangements, and we had a celebration of life, and there was always people there. And the week after, I had a friend come from up north, who my friend Christina, who loved David. He always called her his other wife, his second wife. Because we were so close, and she just loved him too. And she came down the first week, but then she left, and then another friend came, and I was like, okay, great. And like it was a girlfriend that like never really spent the night, and she's like, I'm gonna stay. I'm like, okay. Eventually
mm,
I asked, I'm like, what's going on? And they were like, in a group text, they're like, well, Anna told us, my sister, Anna told us one of us has to be there with you until she lets us go, or says she that
Uh,
you're okay. And I was like,
you
oh.
know, I like this
um
because this is, how they do those meal trains? Like sometimes,
yes.
when somebody's sick or something that they do that. So it's like your sister Anna organized was like a sleepover train, like who's
Yeah,
gonna be next,
who's
but
gonna be there for
next
her?
to next, and that is what an amazing tool. Because I'm hearing all this story and I'm listening to this, I'm like, okay, who was there supporting you? And I hear your
Mm.
parents, I'm sure, because if you were in the hospital for 3 weeks, I'm assuming your parents were helping out with Noah. Yes, was that kind of what was happening?
My
Your
sister
sister,
Daisy
okay.
was the one that took. She has two little. Well, they're not so little anymore, but they're close to Noah's age. My niece and my nephew. And so she took that on for me. She was like his, you know, pseudo mom at that point, and
That so
she
you
took
had
care of
that support system.
Noah,
Mhm.
and Anna took care of me, kind of. Yeah.
That's that, and that is so important. Yeah. So you had somebody to be able to help you with Noah, but then you also had all these people, your family and your friends, taking care of you and supporting you. Because I can't even imagine if it's hard, even in just the first few years of life of a child, to be a parent, to adjust to this new role, right, of parenthood, of taking care of a child. But you were also then taking care of your husband who was going through chemo, which is one of the hardest
Oh.
things to go through, not just the illness, it's the actual response to chemo, right? That makes it be also so hard in that process. So that is just incredible, like what you were able to do in those months. And that's why, like, I admire you so much, Chrisette. And I've told you this so
Mhm.
many times, honestly, my friend. It's just like the way that you show up, not show up in life. You still show up with a smile, and you say about David, Dave. I say David. I know you say Dave,
Mhm.
and I'm like about Dave. How people always have a story about him, and that is, I'm sure, if anybody were to ask about you, everybody will have a story about you
Mhm.
too, about your resilience and your outlook in life. Is just so beautiful. So
Yeah,
thank you for
I
sharing that.
yeah, I think that's why, like, for me, there was a reason for our relationship and our love, and
Mhm,
he taught me so much about relationships and how to nurture them and how to look at life in a perspective that you're never a victim, and
mhm,
um, enjoy the things that life has given you. Um, and in his death, to appreciate the pain because there's growth, and which was hard because I'm like, okay, I learned this lesson, but what about him? And I remember one of the last things, like, we never had the chance to have, like, okay, if this goes bad, what are we going to do? What
mhm,
is our agreement? What do I want for Noah? What do I want for like his funeral? Like, I didn't even want to talk about it. I'm like, no,
mhm,
why are we gonna? We're fighting. We're fighting. We're not thinking of if you don't make it. And he would say things, and so I obviously was able to do something that was very unique for him. Um, Based on the things he had said, that I was grateful he said them, but we never really sat down and had a conversation.
mm,
um, and I remember the last thing he said to me, um, in the hospital, was, and this was about a week before he passed, and he was like, we're not together anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yes, we are. I'm right here. We're together. He's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. And I know what he was trying to say. um, and he was so weak. I think he couldn't really articulate a whole thought or sentiment. And I think he saw me there, and he's like, I don't want you to think that I think you gave up, or I don't know. I interpret that in so many ways. But, obviously he didn't want me to take, he, at that point, I don't think he knew what it was going to be. And he's like, I don't want you spending the rest of your life sitting here looking at me. You know what I
mm,
mean?
mm,
Um, and it was like his way of, like, setting me free in a sense.
mhm, mhm. That
Which
you
I
have to
also
still
was like,
live,
well,
that you still
yeah,
have
but
to
I'm like,
live. Mhm,
yeah, I'm like, it's not fair. Like, I decide that, like, don't tell me what to do.
mhm,
Like, I get to decide how this ends for me. You know what I mean? And which is what I've learned through grief, which I know we're going to talk about as well. But if not for my sisters, my extended family and my friends, I would have crumbled. And death shows you I've learned. It wasn't all easy. Not everyone was kind or understanding, but the people that mattered were there. And
Mm,
that is an incredible kind of testament to like the human spirit and what you can in your grief and loss kind of teach the people around you. And I
mm,
felt like I needed to be that for the people close to me so they can see like, you can overcome anything, and you can, you know, take on any challenge, and it might not look pretty, but it might not be exactly what you want or what you thought it was going to be, but you can still have an amazing life through that challenge.
mm.
So one of my friends, she was working with um, end of life. She did a lot of
Support. Hmm.
yeah, and she was working with like care. She was a caregiver with like the elderly, and then she's actually went into some end of life kind of work. But she got me in contact with this organization called We Spark,
Hmm.
and it's a cancer support network company, and they do a lot of support for the family, not just the patient, but the patient as well. Um, like um, like therapy, or like if you need a wig or how to do your makeup, or in like counseling for the person going through cancer or their family. And so like we didn't even have an opportunity to explore any of that when David was ill because it was so fast.
Hmm.
But I went after, and they do grief counseling, and they do group grief counseling. So that was one of the first things that I did. I did my individual counseling as well, just to deal with other kind of family stuff and, things with Kayla, and, that dynamic that obviously changed
Was
after he
different.
passed.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. So I did one on one. But in terms of hearing and just commiserating, I would say, with other widows and recent
Hmm.
widows, I felt like I needed that, because I did feel like no one really understands the feelings, the ups and downs, and the emotional roller coaster. Um, so we would meet once a week, and it was a group of 7 men and women recently widowed. Um, I think that was like in January that I started that. I think it was right after the holidays, and it was a strong group, different perspective, ages, nationalities. So I felt very like, okay, this is what I needed. We all shared our stories, and it was just really similar in terms of it happens so quickly, or you're not ready to let go. And it's like, you're never ready, you know? But we talked a lot about grief and how, especially in like Western civilization, like you don't like grief is such a taboo,
Yep.
and it's like a scarlet letter that you carry, and why that is, and just kind of understanding that perspective of you didn't do anything wrong. You're not a bad person because you were touched by grief, or because your partner um passed and someone else's part. There was always that. And this is where it was really hard on social media, especially during the holidays. And people post their pictures with their family, like their family cards, and it was like so hard to see, because I'm
Hmm.
like, why did they have their family and I don't?
Mm.
Why do they get to keep that and not me? And finding that kind of resolution for myself, because there isn't a why. And I think for me, Kendra, what I concluded is that, why not me? Like,
Mm.
why would it be better if they go through the grief and not me? That's not fair for them either. Like, life isn't fair. And if you wish the grief upon someone else, like, what does that say about you? Like, as long as you're
Mm.
not in pain, it's okay. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? And
Mhm.
so that was for me. I'm like, well, why not? Like, people, there's a lot of people in my situation. And some of the stories I heard, it was like, um younger moms with younger kids and children that had disabilities, and now they're dealing with those disabilities on their own. It was like, yeah, like, why not? Like, I'm not
Mhm.
anything special that I don't deserve to ever have,
Pain.
grief hit
Mhm.
me. But then what I also thought was, just because this happened doesn't mean that there anything else can't happen either.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? And it was
Yes, and it
interesting when,
has happened, and it's happened for sure.
yeah,
Just
like
as
one
if
of,
there was just like there was pain that was happening in your life, there was also a lot of joy and other things that were gonna come, um,
well, that's the
even though
hope,
you've
right?
gone
But
through that.
even
That's
the
a hope, right,
podcast,
but you didn't know
yeah,
that in that moment, right, in that
yeah.
moment, you don't, and what helped you then, kind of deal with your grief in that moment was the support groups and having that perspective shift a little bit. Yes?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
And then really it was Noah, and it was the same, my son, the same sentiment of grieving the loss of his father,
mhm,
that I'm like, I don't want him to lose who his mom is as well.
mm,
You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, it would be a true tragedy that he lost the essence of his mom through this tragedy as well. So I'm like, Cristela, you have to find it in yourself to still be who you were before this, but honor and carry this for him, so that he doesn't feel cheated in life any more than he already has been.
well, okay, so I always have those goosebump moments. This was
Mm.
one of
Oh.
those because right now what you just said was you had to actually stop me not stop being you have to be selfless in that moment and really completely shift and think, I cannot allow my child to now not only have lost his dad who died, but now also lose his mom in within that grief, that you would lose yourself
Hmm.
so much in the grief and that he would not know who you had been because you'd be so succumbed by the sorrow and the
Right.
pain and not shift it and him
Or
get
the,
to
like,
see
the
the spark in you, the spark
yeah,
in you.
like the resentment. I didn't want him to feel cheated
Mm,
in life or resent what happened, because that can hurt you as an adult or as a teenager, And I'm like, he's going to go through his emotional pitfalls because, he's not being raised by his biological father, and I want to be able for him to be strong and for me to be strong and give him what he needs to manage that, but also look like you've had a great life. You're so lucky in a lot of ways. I never wanted him to feel like a victim or like this happened to him. I want to be
mhm,
like, this happened, but I'm happy and I have a good
mhm,
parent and have a good life. Um,
mhm,
and so I really worked on, finding those moments to be selfish and think of myself and what I needed to in turn be the person that I wanted to be for my son. But that,
mm.
a lot of therapy that didn't come, um, like a light bulb moment. I mean, it did, but it was a
You
lot
didn't
of
go the you
self.
didn't twitch your nose and and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
magically
Yeah, yeah.
happen? No. No
Right.
bewitched
Yeah, it was
moment.
a lot of
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of work and discussing the feelings and crying and being angry and being mad, but always on, away from Noah by myself. And so, one of the things that was a little bit, and I've talked to you about this before, with the grief group, that it was ongoing and some people would fall off and then new people would come. And about like 6 7 months into it, half the group was gone and it was new people. And at that point, um the new people were where I was 6 7 months before that.
Mhm,
And every time someone told the story, it brought me back to those feelings. And
mm,
so I was like, I felt a little bit guilty because I'm like, I don't want to get dragged into that feeling again, because I felt I've made so much progress. And so I stopped doing that and kind of stepped away from it for a little bit in terms of sharing my story and owning, that okay, I'm a widow and I'm going through this grief process, and I don't feel like I need to share it with the world or even with a group of people. I wanted to kind of find the answers and the resolution and who I was kind of on my own, because I just felt like I had a good foundation of like, I understand what grief is in in general for myself.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, now how do I heal from that? How do then I
Mhm.
build this life for myself
Yes.
and my son? Um,
What
and
you're
so
saying is so valid because it's to some extent even just what happens in even therapy. Technically, you're not necessarily, you don't, if you're still going to therapy for the same thing forever and years and years and years and years, the goal would be that you wouldn't need it for the same reason. You know what I mean? For that
agreed.
amount of time, right? So the same with the grief group. It's like you got to a point that you already had the tools you already needed.
Hmm.
And for you to kind of have then other people come in, instead of it helping you, for you, it was actually triggering you to kind of regress a little bit in your own progress of your grief. Is that correct? Did I hear
Yeah,
you correctly? Okay.
correct. Yeah. And then
Hmm.
it became about sympathizing with these people. And then
Hmm.
I'm like, I felt guilty saying, like, oh, I was there 6 months ago, but it gets better, because you don't want to hear that at that
Yeah,
point.
right. Right, right,
You're
right.
like, no, it's not. It hurts. Like, don't tell me that, because I remember feeling that. So, yes, I think there is a progression of stages.
Hmm.
And, for all intents and purposes, I was like at a different stage in my progress. Um, and so I did a little bit more one-on-one therapy for about another year. Um, because one of the things too, like, I met David, when we first got serious, I was 29, and before that, like, I never really had a really strong um long-term relationship with anybody. And so I'm like, great, the one person I had that with, was taken. I'm like, I'm just not that type. I'm not going to find another, connection with anyone. And I remember hearing on the radio, like, statistics show you end up marrying someone that's in your life. And I'm like, well, that already happened to me, kind of. So that's not going to happen again. And, my thought was always, I wanted to be able to raise Noah emotionally, financially, and everything by myself on my own before I started looking for a partner, um, because I wanted to know I can do it. That regardless of what happened in a relationship, I was going to be okay and Noah was going to be okay.
Hmm.
What I didn't realize too, as Noah grew, obviously the questions came about his dad and his understanding of, his death, and, just like, daddy's not coming back. I remember once I made the mistake. I'm like, we're going to go visit daddy. And he got so excited.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh, at the
oh,
cemetery. And I'm like, like, I had to
the
adjust
words.
my wording just because of his comprehension of it, because he, even when I was like, well, your daddy's in heaven. And he's like, well, can we go there? You know?
Mm,
And so it was really, um, being mindful of his development and understanding of just life and death, and, what happened with his dad. Um, but when he really started going into like uh kindergarten, and, doing camps, and he would come, at this point he was like, 5 or 6, and he was like, mom, my friend, so and so at school, his dad, and he doesn't have a mommy, or they're not together, you should meet him, you know
he was playing Cupid then. He
Yeah.
was playing Cupid.
He was. And all, like, I started kind of putting myself out there and trying to
Mm,
see about 2 years after David passed. Cause I'm like, rip the band-aid, like, and,
mhm,
I worked from home, obviously, which is why, I was always there for Noah and available, but I don't meet people. I don't really go out much.
mhm.
I'm a mom. I work full time. And so I started doing some, online dating, which I was petrified, petrified. I mean, you could just imagine. I mean, trying to meet a random stranger online. When we were dating, it was all, you met someone at school or at a
Right,
party
right, right.
somewhere.
Yeah,
This was just like, oh my God.
it's gotta be.
Um,
Oh
so
my
I
God, it
went
was
through that. That
through
whole
that
that
stage.
that
Yeah, how long did
experience.
that stage was how was that for you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my first the I connected with some. I did eHarmony where it's like, there's so many layers before you talk to someone that I was like, I felt comfortable. But the first guy that reached out, like we sent messages back and forth. He's like, "Oh, do you want to meet tomorrow?" I'm like, "Tomorrow? No, I just met you. I'm like, "No, can we talk longer?" And he's like, "No, that's not how it works." I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry. I'm not okay with that."
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but eventually I met a guy on a date, and we went to a coffee shop, and because we were going to sit in, they put the coffee in an actual, cup, and I grabbed it, and you could hear the cup the clattering of
Shaking,
the,
yeah.
yeah, like,
The
and I was like,
little,
"Oh my," I had to
toast,
lift it on
yeah.
top so you don't hear it, because I was shaking so much. But then, you go through the rejections, and, the people like, "Okay, you don't look like what you look like in person," or, "Oh, you're 42, you live with your mom," that's tough. But you know what was interesting? Because people, I never put that I was a widow, but
Mhm,
the guys that would ask like, "Well, what about your ex?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm a widow," and they would get so freaked out and like, "Well, where's your son?" I'm like, "What do you
mhm,
mean?" "Well, who has him?" Like they couldn't understand, like, "Well, I got a babysitter," or like
mhm,
they just didn't, like, how does it work then if
mhm,
he's not with the dad? It was just really
mhm.
interesting, like that
That you were an
concept.
independent, well, because they were also seeing this side of a very independent, woman too. So they would have thought that, like, wait, if he's not with you, you're here on this date, like, who's with him? Like, you know what I mean? Like, um, they didn't probably know how you raised him and that you
Managed,
were
yeah.
independent. Yeah, I managed.
Yeah.
Okay, so for purposes of time, I want to make
Yeah.
sure that we cover then. So you did the online dating, and then a few
Mhm.
years later, you decide to go to a college reunion, CSUN, Cal State Northridge
Well,
reunion type of
no.
little party, or what? How is
Yeah.
okay? You
Yeah,
take me
no.
then. I that's you take me to that story
Yeah,
then.
that reunion was in 2016, and I went, and we saw a lot of, our friends and professors, and it was amazing. But no, it was in 2018. I get a Facebook message from one of our old friends from college, Will Fowler, who was kind of ending his marriage, and just going through like custody stuff, and he's a father of five.
Okay, so remember people, okay, remember how I said how that part in the beginning where she said, "I can't imagine, like, how is it gonna be being a stepmom?" This is back when she was gonna be a stepmom to one, to
To
Kayla,
one.
right? So
Yeah.
now think of this, that the
Now,
person that's
fine.
reaching
But
out,
hey, but you know what?
I
I
love it.
was not even thinking that when he sent me a message, and he had seen my profile on a dating app because they thought we were compatible. And so he thought he was gonna like shame me, and I was like, "Yeah, dude, that's what people do now. Like, get with it." He's like, "Well, I've been out of the game," and he's like, "Oh my god, how crazy is this?" And it was, I don't know, sort of 17 years since we left college that I like
17,
seen
uh-huh.
him, and I was like, "Oh, like you kind of got a little cute," and I'm like, "I want to just like hang out." And I was like, "Well, do you want to like commiserate, and I'll tell you like how long have you been on dating sites?" He's like, "2 weeks." I'm like, "Oh, okay." At this point, it'd been like 2.5 years. I'm like, "I have stories for you," and but I did think, I did find him attractive, and I was like, "Oh God," like, okay, we could just be friends. We could just be friends, and I didn't even think about anything else. I'm like, and I remember telling him like, I've been a stepmom, so this is how you kind of want to perceive this, and expectations, and the ups and downs of life and parenting on your own. And he was very like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry what you've been through," and
Mhm,
he was going through things with like his divorce and custody, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry about the things you're going through," and he we just kind of didn't realize how our stories, even though they were different, were very similar in sentiment
mhm,
of like loss and kind of finding yourself,
mm.
at a later stage in your life. You know what I mean? Like kind of starting over again. at, in your early 40s where you're a parent, and how do you juggle that? How do you date and you have kids, and how do you kind of navigate that? And that's kind of how it started. And we, went out, kind of a meetup. I thought it was a date, if clearly, if I'm, being
Did you
honest. And
doll up? Did you
I think
doll up?
well,
Did you
yeah,
doll
you're
up?
gonna meet a guy,
Did
you
you?
you want to put your best
Yeah.
foot forward.
Yeah.
And I think he was hoping it was a date, but wasn't sure. And so, anyway, we met up in Sherman Oaks, and we sat there for 6 hours. And I
Mm.
knew, I'm like, oh, he's a doll, and he's so sweet. And I'm like, I'm in trouble, and oh my god, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in college, by the way, it's not like we had a few classes with him, but you guys weren't
Mhm.
necessarily like friends. Did we do a play? Did you do a play with him?
No,
Did we?
no.
No, you weren't even in a play with him. So so yeah, so it just this was really like as if you were just starting with to get to
Well,
know
the
somebody
interesting
that
thing
had
is,
happened to be in your life before
yeah, the
somewhat, right?
interesting
Yeah.
thing was that we had a lot of mutual friends, and we were
Mhm.
close with our mutual friends, but he and I were never friends.
Mm.
And he went on a different path. He became a dad really young, and moved to the suburbs. And I was like, I'm gonna be a star, and I'm gonna do theater. And so it was, for a
Mhm.
long time, our lives would never have crossed paths anyway.
Mhm.
So yeah, and so when
Mhm.
he was in this kind of new situation, and navigating being a single dad, it was more because we had so many mutual friends that are still in our life, that kind of supported a little bit of us kind of realizing how much in common we were. um,
Mm.
but the funny thing was, after the 6 hours, I remember calling my friend Dana, who had got me
The
the
one, the
job
other
at
one.
Brooke Williams. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, hey, guess what? And she's just like, oh my God, why have I never thought about it? And, you guys are, so similar. I'm like, we are? I'm like, he's like 6'4", white guy from Bakersfield. I'm like 5'5", Latina, like, like we don't have anything in common. Um, and so he ghosted me for 7 days. Like, he didn't call me
After
at
that
all.
6-hour date? After that
Yes.
6-hour date?
Yes. I was so close to deleting him as a friend, or like blocking him, because I was like, this white boy has some nerve, you know? Um, and then, like, after the 7th day, like, he reached out. I'm like, yo, what's up? Like, what happened? And he's like,
Was
what
he
do you
playing by, like,
mean?
some certain rules of, like, you have to wait 7 days? Remember that movie Swingers?
Yeah,
How I don't remember what the
exactly.
rule
Yeah.
was, but then
Yeah.
Jon Favreau's character, like, calls, like, right away, he doesn't follow the rule and leaves, like, I don't know how many voice messages.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, this
That's
was
what
not Will.
this was not the case.
So yeah, so I gave him a little bit of a hard time, but not really. So we went
Uh-huh.
on a second date, and it was so funny. I was like, let's go to City Walk. I haven't been there. And just kind of going down memory lane of when we were younger and all this stuff. And we were walking, and I'm like, hey, when's your birthday? And he's like, March 16th. And I literally, like, I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, March 16th. And I'm like, that's my son's birthday.
Mm,
And he was
mhm,
like, then he stopped.
mm,
I was like, oh my God. And I remember, like, a couple years back, he had made a comment. I'd posted something about Noah's birthday, and he had made a comment like, oh, I made March 16th cool before, your little guy did. And I said something like, step aside, old man, or something like that. And
mhm,
obviously completely forgot about that. And
mhm,
I was just like, oh, that's so interesting, And it wasn't until, like, the third day. I think it was the next day. I woke up like, oh my God, like, freaked out, because, like, since then I did get a tribute tattoo for David. And one of the things that I didn't touch upon earlier, after he passed, like, the day after his funeral, I took off my wedding ring and wedding band. I didn't. I'm like, it was like a band-aid. I'm like, everything hurts right now, so I'm just gonna not deal with this later, taking this off
mhm,
later, you know?
mhm,
Um, and so from that point, I'm like, I'm gonna get like a tribute tattoo. And so I think it was about a year after he passed, I did, and it's an infinity sign, and on one side it has Noah's birthday, and on the other side it has the day that David passed, and it's kind of like, the life continuing from
Mm,
David through Noah, and
that's
like
so
life will
beautiful.
go on in his life. So you know so I did that. So on the third date, I told Will, and that was one of the things that I always like, oh, is someone going to have a problem with this? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't be with someone who would, you know what I mean? Who would
Hmm.
feel weird about me having a tribute tattoo or anything like that. So I told Will, I'm like, I have your birthday tattooed on my arm. And he was just like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Well, you got the same birthday as my son." And then I showed him that tattoo. He was like, "Oh my goodness, like what? How crazy!"
How it's
And then
just
in
so many things, and he's really shown that's and in your relationship and the post. I remember seeing the post, by the way. I forget which of you, because I've been friends with you both on Facebook for a while, and so I forget whose post I saw first. I don't remember who tagged
oh,
in when you guys posted of your being together, and
mhm.
I was literally like in tears of
Oh,
joy, like seeing
yeah.
that. It was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so sorry. Continue.
Well, so the more I found out about his family, it just became just really like, okay, I felt like, okay, Dave, thanks for sending this with a little bit of humor, because you thought Kayla was a lot, how about five.
Mhm.
And that's what I remember. I would tell my mom, like, after Dave, I'm like, I'm gonna marry someone who's orphaned, never been married, and doesn't have any kids. That's who I want. And I got the
That is
complete
not the case.
opposite. But Will has his family so amazing. They've like taken us in, and his mom is just such an angel. And the interesting thing was that his father, Will's dad, um, his biological father died in an accident when he was going
Mm.
to visit his newborn son at the hospital. And
Oh,
so
I didn't
his
know this.
father was 2 when his father passed away. And
Will
he
was
was
too.
raised
You mean,
no,
wait, his, okay, this is his dad. Oh, yeah, got it. So his dad's dad, so his Will's grandfather.
Will's grandfather. So
Got it.
his
Okay.
mom, John, Will's dad, his mom, Bobby, remarried, and she had 6 kids with her first husband and 4 with the second. They had 9, I think, 9 boys and 1 girl, or 8 boys and 2 girls, but she had 10 kids. But his dad was raised by his stepfather. So
Mm,
it's what who Will is to Noah.
mm,
So I just thought that that was it's been such a sweet kind of connection. And
mhm,
that he's playing that same role of who his like step grandfather was to him.
mhm.
And then the
Right.
last thing that I was like, oh my God, his dad and my dad share a birthday, June 1st.
All these little like date coincidences and things. And that infinity sign, like what you were saying, it's like now that it represents also the fact that, like you said, life continued, right? And that
Mhm.
symbol of Dave's death date on there, right? And then also,
Yes.
then now the birthday of now your husband.
Yeah.
That's why you are Cristela Fowler now and not
Yeah.
Cristela Sarabia Brown. so,
Exactly.
so it's been a year since you've been married. Now, right? It's been a
Yeah.
year anniversary.
Yeah.
A year in which you've not only gone through wedding, reconnecting with like being now a stepmom of 5, but
Hmm.
also you guys moved, then
Yeah.
everything, right? A lot of shifts and changes in this year, but it seems that you've navigated them just like you've navigated all these other things in your life. Like how has this year impacted and shifted also Noah. I want to hear a little bit about Noah now
Yeah.
suddenly having this, not just one brother,
Mhm.
but a whole gang of brothers here and
Yeah,
siblings.
well, he loves it. I mean, it's interesting because like I grew up with, three siblings or four of us, so there was chaos and just, a lot of things happening. So that's kind of what I was used to. And I think for the um 6 years, 5, 6 years that it was just he and I, eh, when the Fowler crew came in, he was so welcoming and ready for that and loves it. He loves his stepbrothers. When we moved to our new house, he had the opportunity to get his own room, because he's here 100% of the time. And he's like, no, I want to share with my brothers. And he loves it. He loves it because there's times when it's just the three of us and he gets all of our attention. And then when the kids are here, it's like game time, like they're so adorable together. They're building, their bonds, and they're boys. And so for him, it's just been a nice, the transition from, it just being us to having this bigger family. And he has his Mima and his grandpa and Will's family, and again he loves having that. And Will's dad is a Santa impersonator, so you can't get anything
Mm.
more adorable or endearing than that. And so he just loves it. He's like, we're his elves. And it was just the family aspect for us has been just such a welcome transition to what the beginning of his life was.
Mhm.
But it was interesting. So, and he's very close to his dad, and he talks about his dad. It's in heaven, and really associates a lot. There's still the moments where I do wish he would remember things. Obviously,
Mhm.
he was one and he doesn't. It's all by stories we tell. And, I'm very open about talking about David and making him still a present um, energy in our life. And, I'm so grateful for the partner that I have that lets me do that. And, I think one of the things that I've learned for myself that I would want to convey for someone dealing with grief is, don't be ashamed of it. And it doesn't end. It doesn't have, you don't have to close the chapter on grief.
Mhm.
And it'll hit you in ways that you won't knew every time. As you grow, as you develop, as you appreciate life, the grief is going to come in different ways.
Yes.
And don't shy away from it. And if there are moments where you want to cry because of that relationship or that person or that loss, like let it out, because then
Mhm.
you can move on from it and then still live and appreciate your life.
And the beauty of
Um,
it. And the beauty of you having that partner that sees that and knows that you are able to still be able to honor when it's Dave's anniversary or you have
mhm.
actually, I think, you even shared a picture, I think even of your wedding anniversary that you would have had to, didn't you share a picture of your
Yeah,
wedding
yeah. So
anniversary with
I
Dave?
and
And this
see,
has been even in this year of
yeah,
of you being
yeah.
married. But because you, and I see in the comments, I see Will Fowler comment, your husband, now husband, commenting, and that shows so much of the strength of your relationship because he's not jealous of your
Mhm.
love for your husband, your first husband. There's nothing to be jealous about. If and if anything is just support for that and supporting that you can still grieve and at the same time still miss him too. It doesn't mean that you do not appreciate and are grateful for what you have right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that he appreciates, who I've become and the gratitude that
Mhm.
we both have. And I think that's what, especially like this holiday season, because, we're in the house, we're all quarantined, and we just feel so grateful. And to be with someone that can appreciate that gratitude just makes it that much more nice, or
Mhm.
um, just more special. I guess it's the
That's
word. But
awesome.
I did want to share a couple of weeks ago. Noah said, Mom, if my dad hadn't died, I wouldn't have known Jack, Ian, Elliot, and Josh and the boys. And I was like, well, how does that make you feel? And he's like, well, I would want to have my dad. And I was like, well, how does it make you feel about, not having the boys in your life? And he's like, well, I wouldn't know any different. So I would be really good about that. And I'm like,
Mm,
his perspective is so, like, pat myself on the back. It's so
mhm,
pragmatic that it's very matter of fact. And
mhm,
that's what I
mhm.
wanted for him. Like, this happened, but it does not define you and who you are. And you can appreciate both,
Yes,
and
yes.
he's 8. And I was like, oh my God, I love you so much.
It's as if like he would have been fine had his story been he would have been grateful had his story been another way, and Dave would have still been alive and that would have been his life, or like this other side now of course that he has, but like how he said he would have not known what it's kind of
Hmm.
like a pick your own ending kind of story, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
like either way he would have still been grateful and appreciated of that life, and the same with you too. You would have been happy and appreciative of your life going that way. But that is not what was in store. This is what's in store. And you are now grateful and appreciative for also the hardships that brought you to where you are now and who you are now.
Yeah, I mean, the growth and the fact that, like, there's
Yes.
hardship in every life, in every story,
Mhm.
and some, are more painful, and but you come out of it stronger, if you don't, let it take it down. And yeah, there you people that that have never been through anything like that, and to not feel like, well, why hasn't that person been through half of what I've been through? Like, you can't compare it.
Mhm.
You can. It'll
Mhm.
just eat you up inside. All you have to do is be grateful for the great things that you have. And the more Noah grows up and he becomes his own person, I feel like it's David coming alive again in front of my
Mhm.
eyes. And it's the gratitude in that. um there are no words. There's
Mhm.
no words to have that gift. The fact that he even gave me that gift to
Mhm.
be able to shepherd his son in this life, is a gift. And
Mhm.
no one knows that. I was here to represent my dad, and we honor that for him always.
Oh, that's so beautiful, amiga. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing not only all these, of course, I loved, okay, so it started with the love story, with the pain, then back again to love story. But in all of this, you've just shown how much you've grown, but at the same time, being really true to who you are in that whole growth process has really been what kind of has kept you on your feet and standing up and looking forward and also being focused on what you want for your child.
Yeah, I mean, it's about appreciation, and still looking at the gifts that life and God, whatever you believe in, there's still a lot of good in your life, and you have to kind of um never feel like attacked, or like this happened to me, because there's still so much joy, and I've been able to find that, you know, able to find and live and truly live in that joy, truly
Mm,
feel happy again. And had I not thought of that, and that was my thing, like, I'm like, I'm like, I want to be happy again, but truly happy, but I can't if I don't work on these things and I don't deal with these things. And I think, anyone listening to this, there is no one way to deal with your grief. You find your answers, you find your resilience, what makes sense for you and who you are as an individual.
yes.
Um and use that to find your answers and find your truth. And it doesn't have to look like anybody else. It doesn't have Your story doesn't have to be like mine or any of the ones that you featured. um find your own path of gratitude, because this life is so hard. I mean, even this year has shown how much struggle one can have in any given avenue. But you have to just kind of keep going and learn from it and appreciate everything that is given to you.
Oh, that right there was the ribbon on top, my friend. That was the perfect way to end this with all this wisdom that you just brought to the table and for the listeners with that. And that is so true. All these stories that we share and feature, as you said, in this podcast, are only just ways of people being able to find some aspects that maybe you find some relatability in the stories. But again, comparison is a thief of joy. It's the
Mhm.
saying. And when
Yeah.
you do compare your life or to somebody else's, you steal yourself from that joy. So even in your own grief, do not compare your grief to somebody else's grief. Where they are in their grief and what they've been through in their life, to be where they are even in their own stage and whatever their grief may look like, is very different than yours. So you cannot even compare yourself in that aspect. And you said that
Exactly.
perfectly. So thank
Yeah.
you, my dear, long, long
Yes.
lifetime friend. I am so grateful again to you. And if people, do you have Instagram? Do you have like a public Instagram account or anything like that, or no?
I
Like if people
do. It's
wanted,
not
okay,
public, but I don't use the Instagram that much.
okay.
I do
So
have it, but I once in a
you
while,
let me know.
but
That's fine.
yeah, I
If you
do
want to give me
Facebook more.
anything to,
Yeah.
if you want me to put anything on the show notes so that people can, if they want to get in touch with you, that they can, let me know and I will put
Oh
that in
yeah.
the show notes.
I
But,
would love that.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, thank you once again, my
Yeah.
friend, and for taking the time out of your at home work. I hope well, no, 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 you're not working right now. Right now it's past work hours, right?
Oh yeah. No, I'm working. This was my lunch break.
Okay, for using your, I was trying to like be like, oh, just in case somebody from work listens. I'm like, okay, your
Oh
lunch
yeah,
break
no, no,
hour
it's fine. Yeah, no, we're
to
good.
talk to
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much, my dear.
Yeah.
And for
No,
Noah for
thank you.
studying at home from home and still being able to
Yes.
allow mom to hop on this podcast. So thanks again.
Yeah. No, thank you for inviting me and letting me share my story. And, I hope that it helps anyone who, needs to hear it.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.